When Michael Jordan was cleaning out his mother's guest room on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, he picked up her old brown purse to move it to the shelf. Something fell out. A photograph. Small. Old. Black and white. Folded so many times the creases had become part of the picture itself. He picked it up. A little boy. Front steps of a small house. Overalls with a missing button. 2 shoes that didn't quite match. And eyes so serious, it looked like that little boy already knew something heavy was coming his way. Michael didn't recognize him. Not at first. He turned the photograph over. On the back, in old faded pencil, someone had written 5 words in handwriting Michael had never seen before. "Don't let him forget this." He read it again, then a 3rd time. And his hands, the most famous hands in the history of basketball, were not steady anymore. He walked down the hallway and found his mother, Dolores, in the kitchen. He set the photograph on the table between them without saying a single word. Dolores looked down at it. She did not look surprised. She looked like a woman who had been waiting a very long time for a train she wasn't sure would ever arrive. She pulled out a chair, sat down slowly, folded her hands on the table. And then she said 6 words that would change everything Michael Jordan thought he knew about himself, about his gift, and about where his greatness actually came from. What Dolores told him next pulled back the curtain on a secret she had carried every single day for over 50 years. A secret connected to a little boy nobody remembers. A winter night in 1956, a mistake she made at 12 years old. And a Saturday morning when Michael was just 3 years old that he has absolutely no memory of. But that may have shaped every single thing he ever became. This is not the story you think it is. Stay with us until the very end. Because the moment everything is finally revealed, the moment the 2 pieces come together after 50 years apart, is something you will not see coming. And you will not forget it. Michael Jordan had won 6 championships. He had stood on podiums in front of millions of people. He had held trophies over his head while confetti fell like snow. He had heard his name chanted in arenas so loud the sound lived in his chest for days afterward. But on a quiet Tuesday afternoon in 2019, none of that felt real. What felt real was a brown leather purse sitting in his hands. Old, cracked at the corners. The strap worn thin in the middle from 40 years of being carried. It smelled like powder and something sweet, like the inside of a cedar chest that had been closed for a long time. He had come to his mother Dolores's house to help her redecorate the guest room. A simple afternoon. Move some boxes, rearrange some furniture, maybe stay for dinner. He picked up the purse to move it to the closet shelf. And something fell out. It hit the floor without a sound. Just a soft tap, the kind of sound a secret makes when it finally gets tired of being kept. Michael bent down and picked it up. A photograph. Small. Black and white. Folded twice, so the creases had become part of the image itself, like rivers running through it. The edges were soft and brown, the way old paper gets when it has been handled by careful hands for a very long time. He held it up toward the window where the afternoon light was coming in clean and golden. A little boy. Front steps of a small house. Overalls with a button missing. 2 shoes that didn't quite match. And eyes, big, quiet, serious eyes, that looked directly into the camera like the boy was trying to memorize whoever was standing behind it. Michael did not recognize the boy. He turned the photograph over. On the back, in faded pencil, someone had written 5 words in handwriting he had never seen before. "Don't let him forget this." Michael stood very still. He read the words again. Then a third time. His mother's voice came from down the hallway, asking if he wanted sweet tea. He didn't answer. He sat down slowly on the edge of the guest bed, on the photograph in one hand and the old brown purse in the other. And he stayed there for a long moment. A man who had never been afraid of anything on a basketball court. Feeling something he could not name settle into the room around him like a change in the weather. He knew that handwriting belonged to someone important. He just didn't know why it felt like it also belonged to him. He got up, walked down the hallway, found his mother in the kitchen. He set the photograph on the table between them without saying a word. Dolores looked down at it. She did not look surprised. She looked like a woman who had been waiting a long time for a train she wasn't sure would ever come. She pulled out a chair, sat down slowly, folded her hands. And she said the 6 words that would change everything Michael Jordan thought he knew about where he came from. I wondered when you'd find that. The kitchen was quiet, not the comfortable kind of quiet that sits between two people who know each other well. This was a different kind. The kind that has weight. The kind that means something is about to shift, and neither person is quite ready for it. Michael pulled out the chair across from his mother and sat down. He placed the photograph on the table between them, face up. The little boy staring at the ceiling now, his serious eyes pointing at nothing. "Who is he?" Michael asked. Dolores didn't answer right away. She looked at the photograph the way you look at something you have memorized so completely that seeing it again almost hurts. Her hands stayed folded on the table. Her back stayed straight. "How long have you had this?" Michael asked. "Longer than you've been alive," she said. Michael waited. He had learned a long time ago that his mother could not be rushed. Not when it mattered. She moved through important things at her own pace, like a river that already knows where it's going. She reached across the table and picked up the photograph, turned it over, read the 5 words on the back, the way you read something you already know by heart but still need to see with your eyes. "Don't let him forget this." She set it back down. "That is not your father," she said. "It is not your brother Larry. It is not anyone you grew up with, or went to school with, or ever played ball against." Michael looked at the boy again. The mismatched shoes, the missing button, those eyes. "Then who?" he said. Then Dolores looked out the kitchen window. The backyard was still and green. A bird moved through the yard fast and low, and then was gone. She said, "He is the reason you ever touched a basketball in the first place." Michael felt something move through his chest. Not quite pain, not quite recognition. Something in between, like hearing a song for the first time that somehow sounds like a memory. "And there's something else," Dolores said. She turned back from the window and looked directly at her son for the first time since he had walked into the kitchen. "I have felt guilty about this boy every single day of my life. Every day. Including every day I watched you play." The refrigerator hummed. The afternoon light moved slowly across the floor. Michael looked at his mother, really looked at her, and realized that the woman sitting across from him had been carrying something far heavier than an old brown purse for 50 years. He just hadn't known to ask. "Start from the beginning," he said quietly. "All of it." Dolores took a slow breath. She straightened the photograph so it sat perfectly square on the table in front of her, and then she said a name Michael had never heard before. "His name was Elias," she said, "and this story starts before you, before your father, before any of it." She paused. "It starts with a boy who should have been great, and a winter that took that away from him. and a mistake I made when I was 12 years old that I have never once stopped thinking about. Dolores closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, she wasn't in the kitchen anymore. Not really. She was somewhere else, somewhere further back. Michael could see it happen, the way her face softened and shifted, the way her eyes went to a place he couldn't follow. She was 12 years old again, and she was home. "We lived in Wallace," she began. "Small town, small life, but a good one. Your grandfather, Clifton, worked the textile mill 6 days a week. Your great-grandmother, Rosie May, kept the house and the garden and the 7 of us children in line with nothing more than a look." Michael smiled a little at that. He had heard about Rosie May his whole life. A woman built out of patience and iron. "The house next to ours belonged to the Greer family," Dolores continued. "Solomon Greer worked the same mill as your grandfather. His wife, Ivy, was the quietest woman I ever knew. She barely raised her voice above a whisper, but when she did speak, everybody listened. They had one child." She touched the edge of the photograph gently. "Elias." She said the name like it had its own weather around it. "He was 6 years old in the summer of 1956. I was 12. He used to follow me everywhere that summer. Everywhere. Like a little shadow that nobody told to go home." She paused. "I called him Little Bug. He called me D. Nobody else ever called me that. Just him." Michael watched his mother's face. There was something tender moving across it. Something old and soft and painful all at once. "That boy could play basketball," she said. "And I don't mean the way children play. I mean he had something. Something you couldn't teach and couldn't explain. And he had a bent coat hanger nailed to a wooden post in the dirt yard between our houses. The ball he used was half flat. None of it mattered. He never missed." She shook her head slowly, like she still couldn't fully believe it after all these years. "Our pastor, Reverend Amos Tull, he saw Elias playing one afternoon after Sunday service. He stood at that fence for 10 minutes, without saying a word, just watching. Then he walked over to Solomon and Ivy and told them straight, 'That boy has a gift from God, and it would be a sin not to tend to it.'" Michael leaned forward slightly on the table. "Reverend Tull said he would help get Elias into the youth basketball program at the community center in the next town over. He said he would arrange everything." Solomon and Ivy were proud. A quiet proud, the kind that sits deep in your chest and doesn't need to announce itself. Dolores stopped. She looked down at her folded hands. "I took that photograph on a Sunday afternoon not long after. I borrowed a camera from a girl at school. I don't know exactly why I did it." Her voice went low, almost a whisper. "I think I already knew, the way you sometimes know things before they happen, that I needed to hold on to that moment, that it was important, that something was coming." She was quiet for a few seconds. The kitchen clock marked the silence in small, steady beats. "That winter," Dolores said, "everything changed." She looked up at Michael. Her eyes were dry, but the pain behind them was not. "A sickness came through Wallace, and Elias Greer got sick. And I was there the night it got bad." Her voice stayed even, controlled, and the way a person speaks when they have rehearsed something 1,000 times in their own head, but never said it out loud. "And I did something, or I didn't do something, that I have never forgiven myself for." She pressed her lips together. "Not in 50 years. The sickness came in December. It moved through Wallace the way bad things often do in small towns. Quietly at first, then all at once. It started with a cough. then a fever, then whole families staying inside with the curtains drawn and the lights low. It hit the Greer house on a Tuesday. Ivy Greer got sick first. Then Solomon. Then, 3 days before Christmas, little Elias. Rosie Mae Peoples knew things about sickness that no doctor had ever taught her. She knew which roots to boil and which leaves to press against a forehead and which words to say quietly over a sick child when you weren't sure if medicine alone was going to be enough. When she heard the Greers were all down, she put on her coat without being asked. She told Dolores to come with her and carry the basket. They went every evening for 4 days. Solomon and Ivy were sick, but managing. Elias was the one who scared everyone. His fever climbed and wouldn't come back down. He lay in his small bed with his eyes half open, not quite awake and not quite asleep, breathing in shallow little pulls, like each one cost him something. Dolores sat with him while Rosie Mae and Ivy worked in the next room. Her job was simple. Keep the cold cloth on his forehead. Watch his breathing. If anything changed, if he got worse, and if his breathing changed, if he cried out, she was to call for the adults immediately. She was 12 years old. She had not slept properly in 2 days. On the 4th night, somewhere between midnight and morning, Dolores fell asleep in the chair beside Elias's bed. She didn't mean to. She fought it. She remembers fighting it. The way her eyes burned, the way she kept sitting up straighter, the way she pressed her fingernails into her palm to stay awake. But the chair was warm and the house was quiet, and her body was 12 years old and exhausted. She was asleep before she knew it was happening. When the adults came in at dawn, Elias was burning. His temperature had spiked during the night. The cloth on his forehead was dry and warm. His breathing had changed. Faster, more shallow, with a sound underneath it that made Rosie Mae's face go tight in a way Dolores had never seen before. The doctor came. There were conversations behind closed doors. Dolores sat on the hallway floor with her back against the wall and her knees pulled to her chest, and she did not cry because she was too scared to cry. Elias survived, but the fever had been too high for too long. The damage it left behind was quiet and permanent. A slight tremor in both hands, a disconnect between what his mind knew and what his body could do. The fluid grace that had made him impossible to watch without holding your breath. Gone. Not all at once. Just slowly drained away over the weeks that followed, like water finding its way out through a crack you can't see. He never made it to the community center. Reverend Amos Tull came to the Greer house in January with a kind face and careful words. He said God had other plans. He said sometimes gifts take different shapes than we expect. Solomon Greer shook his hand and thanked him. Ivy Greer nodded and looked at the floor. Elias sat in the corner and said nothing. He already understood. 6 years old, and he already understood. Nobody blamed me, Dolores said. Her voice was flat and quiet. Not your great-grandmother, not Solomon or Ivy, not Elias. Nobody said a single word to me about that night. She looked at Michael steadily. But I was there. I was supposed to watch him, and I fell asleep. And by the time the adults came in, something had happened to that little boy that could not be undone. She smoothed the edge of the photograph with her thumb. I have never told another living soul that story. Not your father, not your brothers or sisters, not anyone. She paused. I have just carried it, the same way I carried that purse, every single day. Because some things you don't put down. You just keep carrying them. Michael didn't speak. He looked at his mother sitting across from him, small and straight and steady, and he understood for the first time that the strongest people he had ever known were not strong because life had been easy on them. They were strong because life had been heavy, and they had carried it anyway. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. She looked down at his hand, then back up at him. "There's more," she said softly. "The part I haven't told you yet is the part about you." Michael sat back slowly in his chair. The afternoon light had shifted while they had been sitting at that table. It was lower now, coming in at a longer angle through the kitchen window, painting everything in a shade of gold that made the room feel like it existed slightly outside of ordinary time. "The part about me," he repeated. Dolores nodded. She was quiet for a moment, not the hesitating kind of quiet, the gathering kind, the kind that means a person is picking up something heavy and making sure they have a good grip before they lift it. "When you were born," she began, "and I looked at you for the first time, really looked at you, I saw your hands." Michael waited. "You had these long, wide hands, even as a baby. And when you reached for things, there was something in the way you moved." She paused. I had only ever seen that once before in my life." She tapped the photograph gently with one finger. Michael felt the air in the room change. "I made a decision," Dolores said. "I didn't talk to your father about it first. I didn't ask anyone's permission. I just knew what I needed to do, the way you sometimes know things that you cannot explain and cannot argue with." She folded her hands again on the table. "When you were 3 years old, I put you in the car one Saturday morning, and I drove to see Elias Greer." The room was so still that Michael could hear his own breathing. "He was in his late 20s by then," Dolores continued, "living in a small apartment over on the east side of town, working as a janitor at an elementary school. Quiet life, simple life. He never married, never really talked much about the past." She looked down at the photograph. "But he still had a bent coat hanger hoop on his wall. Same idea as the one from the yard when we were children. Nailed right into the plaster above his bedroom door. And in the corner of that room, sitting on the floor, was an old worn basketball." She almost smiled at that. Almost. "I asked him if he would spend some time with you, just playing, just showing you things. I told him I had watched you reach for objects the way he used to reach for that half-flat ball in the dirt yard. I told him I thought you had something." She looked up at Michael. "I told him I thought the gift had found a new place to live." Michael stared at his mother. He opened his mouth, closed it. He had given thousands of interviews in his life. He had never once been unable to find a single word. "He said yes," Dolores continued, without hesitating. Didn't ask why, didn't ask what was in it for him, just said yes. For one full summer, Elias Greer spent Saturday mornings with a 3-year-old boy in his small apartment. He showed him how to hold the ball with his fingers spread wide and even, how to feel the weight of it settle into his palm, how to use his wrist at the end of a shot, not throwing, releasing. He showed him the difference between forcing a ball toward a target and trusting your body to already know the way. His hands shook slightly the whole time. It didn't matter. He still knew exactly what to do. Dolores sat in the corner of the room on a wooden chair and watched every single Saturday. She never interrupted. She never coached. She just watched the two of them, the young man who had lost something irreplaceable and the tiny boy who didn't know yet what he was receiving. And she held that image inside herself like something sacred. "You have no memory of it," she said to Michael. "You were too small. By the time you were old enough to remember things clearly, That summer was already years behind you. Michael was leaning forward now with both elbows on the table. His eyes had not left his mother's face. He never told anyone, Dolores said. Not a soul. All those years, all those championships, all those games, all those nights the whole world was talking about Michael Jordan. Elias Greer sat alone in a series of small rooms and watched, and never said a word to anybody. Her voice dropped lower. He just watched you play, and he knew something nobody else in the world knew. What did he know? Michael asked. His voice came out quieter than he intended. Dolores looked at her son for a long, steady moment. He knew that every time you released a ball perfectly, every impossible shot, every moment the whole arena held its breath, some small part of what he had lost was still alive somewhere in the world. She paused. He told me once, years later, that watching you play was the closest thing to peace he had ever found. Michael put both hands flat on the table. He looked at them. These hands that had been written about and photographed and studied and celebrated for 30 years. These hands that he had always believed were simply his, a gift from nature, from God, from hard work and 10,000 hours in gymnasiums. And he looked at his hands as if he was seeing them for the first time. Why didn't you ever tell me? He asked. Not with anger, with something much quieter than anger. Something that was still finding its shape. Because you were working so hard to become yourself, Dolores said simply. And I didn't want you carrying his story on top of your own. You had enough weight already. She reached out and covered his hands with hers. Her hands were small and warm and certain. But you're not 23 anymore, she said. And Elias is 82. And there are things in this world that need to be said before the chance to say them closes forever. Michael looked up. Something moved across his face. A kind of quiet, urgent reckoning. Is he still alive? He asked. Dolores nodded once. He is, she said. Yeah, and I think it's time you met him properly. Michael did not sleep that night. He lay in the guest room of his mother's house, the same room where he had found the purse, the same room where the afternoon had begun as something ordinary. And he stared at the ceiling while the house settled and creaked around him in the dark. He kept thinking about Saturday mornings. His whole life, Saturday mornings had meant basketball. Even as a child, before organized practice, before coaches and drills and scouting reports, Saturday mornings had always felt different from other mornings, charged with something. Like his body woke up on Saturdays, already knowing it was supposed to do something important. He had always thought that feeling came from inside himself. He understood now that it might have been a memory his body kept, that his mind had never been able to reach. He got up at 5 in the morning and sat at the kitchen table alone with a glass of water and the photograph. He sat with it for a long time. The little boy with the serious eyes looked back at him from across 60 years, patient and still. Don't let him forget this. Michael turned it over. Read the words again. He thought about Rosie Mae Peoples, a woman he had never met. A great-grandmother who died before he was old enough to know her, sitting somewhere with a borrowed pencil and writing those 5 words on the back of a photograph, knowing somehow that the words needed to survive, knowing that the photograph needed to be kept. He thought about what kind of woman sees that far ahead, and he thought about what kind of love plans for a future it will never be alive to see. In the morning, Dolores gave him a phone number written on a folded piece of paper. The handwriting was hers, neat and careful. The facility is called Pineview Gardens, she said. It's in Wilmington. He's been there 2 years now. I visit when I can. Michael looked at her. "You've been visiting him?" "Every few months," she said, quietly, without apology. Michael nodded slowly. He didn't say anything else. He folded the paper and put it in his shirt pocket next to his heart. Not intentionally, just the closest pocket. And later that afternoon, he called his personal assistant, a calm and efficient woman named Carla Whitmore, who had worked with him for 11 years and had never once been rattled by anything he asked of her. "So I need to visit someone in Wilmington," he told her. "Private. No security detail beyond the car. No press. No announcement. Just me and my mother." Carla asked no questions. She simply said, "When would you like to go?" "Tuesday," Michael said. "Early." The drive from Charlotte to Wilmington takes a little over 2 hours on a clear morning. They left before sunrise. Michael drove. He almost always drove when it was just the two of them. Dolores sat in the passenger seat, with her old brown purse in her lap, both hands resting on top of it, watching the highway unspool in the headlights. They didn't talk much in the first hour. The sky went from black to deep blue to a pale gray pink as the sun began to find the horizon. The highway was quiet. Long stretches of pine trees on both sides, dark and tall and still, though occasionally a town would appear out of the darkness. A water tower, a gas station with its lights on, a traffic signal blinking yellow in the empty intersection. And then the trees would close back in, and it would be just the two of them again, moving through the dark. Michael glanced at his mother's hands on the purse. He thought about all the times he had seen those hands, clapping in the stands, gripping his face after a hard loss, folded in prayer, pressed flat against the kitchen counter while she laughed at something his father said. He knew those hands better than he knew almost anything else in the world. He had never once thought about what they might be carrying. "Were you ever going to tell me?" he asked. "If I hadn't found the photograph?" Dolores considered this honestly, the way she always considered everything, fully and without rushing to comfort him. "I don't know," she said. "I thought about it every time you won something big. Every time they put a trophy in your hands on television, I would think, he should know. He should know the whole story." She looked out at the passing trees. But then the moment would pass, and it seemed too late. And then more time would go by, and it seemed even later. She was quiet for a moment. "Time has a way of making hard conversations feel impossible," she said, "even when they're necessary, even when they're important." Michael kept his eyes on the road. "Especially then," he said. Dolores looked over at him. Something moved across her face. Relief, maybe. The particular relief of being understood by the person whose understanding matters most. "Yes," she said softly. "Especially then." Pineview Gardens sat back from the road behind a low iron fence and a row of mature oak trees whose roots had begun lifting the corners of the concrete path that led to the entrance. The building was single-story, painted a warm cream color, with wide windows and flower beds along the front that someone tended carefully. It looked quiet, settled, like a place that understood its own purpose. Michael pulled into the parking lot and turned off the engine. They sat for a moment. "Is he expecting us?" Michael asked. "I called ahead," Dolores said. "I told them we were coming. I didn't tell them who you were." Michael nodded. He looked at the entrance. Through the glass doors he could see a reception desk and soft interior lighting and a corridor stretching away into the building. Somewhere down that corridor, but in a room with a window that looked out at a courtyard, an 82-year-old man was waiting. A man who had spent 6 decades watching from a distance. A man who had given away something irreplaceable and called it a gift. Michael opened the car door. The morning air was cool and smelled like pine and damp earth and something green and living. He breathed it in slowly. Then he walked around the car, opened his mother's door, and offered her his hand. She took it. They walked toward the entrance together, the most famous athlete in the world and his mother, and the weight of a story 50 years in the making. And the oak trees stood over them like they had been waiting too. The glass doors slid open. A nurse looked up from behind the reception desk. Middle-aged, warm-faced, with reading glasses pushed up into her hair. Her name tag read, Beatrice Odom, RN. She looked at Dolores first. Then she looked at Michael. Then back at Dolores. Her expression shifted. Not into excitement or recognition the way most people's expressions shifted when they saw Michael Jordan, but into something more serious than that. Something that looked close to urgency. "Miss Jordan," she said, stepping out from behind the desk, "I'm so glad you called ahead." She lowered her voice. "He's been asking for you. Every day this week he's been asking." Dolores's hand tightened slightly on Michael's arm. "He says he has something important to tell you," Beatrice continued. She glanced at Michael briefly, then back to Dolores. "He says he needs to say it before he runs out of time." The corridor stretched out ahead of them, quiet and long. Michael felt the hair rise slowly on his arms. He had walked into stadiums full of 50,000 people without feeling nervous. He had taken the last shot of championship games without his hands trembling once. But standing in this quiet hallway in Wilmington, North Carolina, on a Tuesday morning, following a nurse named Beatrice toward a room at the end of a corridor, he felt something move through him that he had not felt since he was very young. He felt small, not in a bad way, in the way you feel when you suddenly understand that the world is larger and older and more connected than you ever thought to check. He kept walking. The room was at the end of the hall. Room 12. The door was open just enough to let a thin band of morning light fall across the corridor floor. Beatrice stopped outside it and turned to them with a quiet expression that said, "This part is yours, not mine," and stepped back without another word. Dolores looked at Michael. He nodded once. She pushed the door open gently. The room was small and clean and full of soft light. The window on the far wall looked out at the courtyard Dolores had mentioned. A dogwood tree stood in the center of it, bare at this time of year, its branches reaching in every direction like open hands. A small radio sat on the nightstand, turned low, playing something instrumental and unhurried. And in the chair beside the window, wrapped in a green cardigan that was slightly too large for him, sat Elias Greer. He was small now in the way that very old men sometimes become small. Not diminished exactly, but condensed. You're like life had pressed him down to only the most essential version of himself. His hair was white and close-cropped. His face was lined and quiet. His hands rested on the arms of the chair, and they trembled slightly, just as they always had, just as they always would. But his eyes were the same eyes from the photograph. Big, dark, serious, looking directly at you like he was trying to memorize whoever was standing in front of him. He saw Dolores first. His face opened slowly. Not a sudden smile, but something that built from the inside out, like a room filling with light, one lamp at a time. "Dee," he said. His voice was thin but steady. "Little bug," she said. She crossed the room and took both his trembling hands in hers and held them the way you hold something that has been lost for a long time and found again, and you are not yet ready to believe it is real. Then Elias looked past her shoulder. He looked at Michael. And something happened to his face that had nothing to do with fame or recognition. It was older than that, deeper than that. the expression of a man seeing something he planted in dark soil a lifetime ago and never expected to see come fully into bloom. He studied Michael for a long moment. Then he said, "There he is." His voice barely made it above a whisper. "I wondered if I'd ever see you again, boy." Michael stood very still. "I'm told I owe you something," he said. His own voice came out rough at the edges. Elias shook his head slowly, back and forth. "Once. Gee, you don't owe me a single thing," he said. "You gave me everything." Michael pulled a chair close and sat down so they were level with each other, eye to eye, the way his mother had taught him to sit when something important was being said. "Tell me," Michael said. Elias told him. He told him about the television he had owned in every apartment he had ever rented. Always small, always second-hand, always positioned so he could see it clearly from wherever he sat. He told him about 1984, watching the Olympics in a studio apartment with a broken window he had covered with a piece of cardboard, leaning forward in his chair while a young man from North Carolina moved across a basketball court in a way that made the rest of the world stop what it was doing and pay attention. He told him about the finals, all 6 of them. How he had watched every game alone, mostly. How he had kept a notepad beside his chair without entirely knowing why. How after particularly brilliant plays, he would pause and sit back and close his eyes and hold the moment behind them for as long as he could. The way you hold a sip of something warm in your mouth before you swallow. "Every shot you hit that seemed impossible," Elias said. "I recognized something in it." He looked at his own hands for a moment. "The angle, the wrist, the way you trusted it, even when logic said not to." He looked back up. "I put that in you. In those Saturday mornings. I know I did." His voice didn't carry pride. It carried something quieter than pride. Something that had been aged by decades into a kind of pure, clear peace. "I couldn't play," he said simply, "but you played for me. And every single night that you played for me. And you didn't even know my name." The radio on the nightstand moved through something soft and slow. Dolores was crying without sound, the way people cry when they have been holding something for so long that the release of it has no drama left in it. Just release. Michael pressed his lips together hard. He looked at this man. This small, white-haired green cardigan man with shaking hands and clear eyes. And he understood something that no championship trophy or ceremony or magazine cover had ever taught him. Greatness is never only yours. It never begins with you. It is always, always built on the foundation of someone who came before. Someone who carried the blueprint inside them through circumstances that never gave them the chance to build it themselves. And someone who passed it forward in whatever quiet way they could, and then stepped back and watched from a distance and asked for nothing and expected nothing, and found a way to call that enough. Michael breathed in slowly. He was not a man who cried easily. He had learned very young to keep that particular door closed in public. But he could feel it now. The pressure behind his eyes, the tightness across his chest. And he did not try very hard to stop it. He let it come. After a while, Elias shifted in his chair. He moved slowly, carefully, with the particular deliberateness of someone who has learned not to trust sudden movements. He reached down beside the chair and then stopped, looked at Michael, looked at Dolores. "I have kept something," he said. "A long time." He reached beneath the thin mattress of his bed, just the edge of it, near the foot, and his trembling fingers found what they were looking for. He pulled it out. He held it toward the light. Michael went completely still. It was a photograph, small, black and white, folded at the corners, the edges soft and brown with age. The same boy, the same front steps, the same overalls with the missing button, the same mismatched shoes, the same serious eyes looking directly into the camera. The same photograph, except this one was not worn, not faded, perfectly preserved, kept flat and protected, and carefully hidden for over 60 years. Michael looked at his mother. Dolores's hand had come up to cover her mouth. Elias turned the photograph over with his shaking hands and held it so they could both see the back. And the same faded pencil, the same handwriting, Rosie May's handwriting, but different words, 5 different words. He will carry it forward. The room was absolutely silent, except for the radio, and the sound of 3 people breathing, and the distant movement of the dogwood tree outside the window in the morning wind. Michael looked from the photograph in Elias's hands to the purse in his mother's lap. He understood. Rosie May had taken 2 copies of that photograph on that Sunday afternoon. She had written on the back of each one. She had given one to her daughter and one to the little boy next door, and she had said nothing to either of them about the other. She had split the message in 2. She had trusted that life. If they were lucky, if they were brave enough, and if they held on long enough, would eventually put the 2 halves back together. Don't let him forget this. He will carry it forward. 1 sentence. 53 years in the making. Michael reached into his mother's lap. He opened the purse himself, gently, and took out the worn photograph. He held it next to Elias's, side by side in the morning light coming through the window. The same boy. 2 copies. 2 halves of a promise made by a woman who had loved both of them before she was gone. He sat there for a long time with both photographs in his hands, and he did not say anything, because there are moments in a life when words are simply the wrong size for what is happening. This was one of those moments. Nobody moved for a while, where the 3 of them just sat together in that small room with the morning light coming through the window, and the radio playing something without words, and the dogwood tree moving quietly outside in the courtyard. There was no rush, nowhere else to be, nothing more important happening anywhere in the world than what was happening in this room right now. It was Elias who finally broke the silence, not with anything heavy, not with anything that required an answer. He simply said, "Tell me something, Michael. What does it feel like when a shot is perfect? What does it actually feel like in your hands?" Michael looked at him. He thought about it honestly, the way Elias deserved, instead of reaching for the easy answer he had given in 1,000 interviews over 30 years. "Like nothing," he said finally. "Like your hands already knew. Like your mind was the last one to find out." Elias closed his eyes. He nodded slowly, with the satisfaction of a man who has just heard something confirmed that he always believed but could never prove. "Yes," he said quietly. "That's exactly right." He opened his eyes. That's exactly what it felt like. He was not talking about Michael's hands. He was talking about his own. Before the winter, before the fever, before December 1956 took something from him that nobody ever gave back. Michael understood. He didn't say so. He just held it, the weight of what Elias had just shared, and he let the man have the moment fully without rushing in to fill it with words. They stayed for 2 hours. They talked about Wallace, about sweet potatoes and tin roofs, and the sound a half-flat basketball makes bouncing on dry dirt. And they talked about Reverend Amos Tull, who had lived to 91 and preached his final sermon sitting down because his legs wouldn't hold him anymore, but his voice still could. They talked about Rosie May, the kind of woman she was, the quality of her silences, the way she could communicate entire sermons with nothing more than the angle of her chin. They did not talk about championships. They did not talk about records or statistics or the things Michael Jordan had accumulated over a lifetime that the world considered most worth counting. None of that belonged in this room. What belonged in this room was simpler and older than any of it. Two people who had been connected by an invisible thread for over 50 years, finally sitting close enough to see each other clearly. And a third person, the woman who had held the thread in her hands the whole time, quietly, without ever letting go, sitting between them with her old brown purse in her lap, and her eyes dry, and her back straight. Before they left, Michael asked Elias the question he had been working up to for the better part of an hour. "Is there anything you want?" he asked. "Anything at all. Tell me something real." Elias didn't answer right away. He looked out at the dogwood tree in the courtyard. His hands trembled on the arms of the chair. The green cardigan shifted when he breathed. Then he looked back at Michael with those clear, serious eyes. "A basketball," he said. "Signed. Not for anybody else. Not for a wall or a case." He paused. "Just to hold." He looked down at his hands. "My hands always remembered," he said softly. "See, even when everything else forgot. I want to feel one more time what a real one feels like." Beatrice found a marker in the top drawer of the reception desk. Michael signed the basketball they brought from the car, the one Carla had quietly placed in the trunk the night before, because Carla Whitmore had worked with Michael Jordan for 11 years, and she always thought of everything. He signed it right there in the room, sitting forward in the chair with the ball resting on his knee. He thought for a moment about what to write. Then he wrote the only thing that was true. To Elias, the first one who knew. "Michael." He handed it across. Elias took it in both shaking hands. He didn't bounce it. He didn't hold it up or turn it over to read the signature. And he just wrapped both arms around it and held it against his chest, the way you hold something you thought you had lost forever. His eyes closed. His breathing slowed. And something on his face went peaceful, like a window opening in a room that had been shut too long, like a note held at the end of a song until it finally, gently, completely, resolves. On the drive home, the sun was high and warm, and the pine trees threw long, moving shadows across the highway. Dolores put both photographs back inside the brown purse. She pressed the clasp closed with a soft click that sounded in the quiet car, like a period at the end of a very long sentence. Michael drove. He kept both hands on the wheel. After a long while, he said, "Why did she split the message? Rosie May. Oh, why not just write the whole thing on one photograph and give it to one person?" Dolores looked out at the highway ahead of them. "Because the whole message only makes sense," she said, "when the right people are finally in the same room." She rested her head back against the seat. "She wasn't writing instructions," Dolores said quietly. "She was writing a prayer, and she trusted that eventually, even if it took 50 years, it would be answered." Michael nodded slowly. He didn't say anything else for a long time. But somewhere around the halfway point of the drive home, without planning to, without thinking about it consciously at all, he reached over and put his hand briefly over his mother's hands where they rested on the purse. She turned her palm up and held on. 3 months later, Uri Elias Greer passed away quietly in his sleep at Pineview Gardens. He was 82 years old. His room was tidy and still. The signed basketball sat on the nightstand beside his radio, right where he had placed it the evening Michael and Dolores had driven away. Beatrice Odom, the nurse who found him, said he looked peaceful. She said he was smiling. That same week, without a press release or an announcement or a single camera present, letters arrived at every youth basketball program in North Carolina. Plain envelopes, no return address except a post office box. Inside each one was a letter and a check, and a single line at the bottom explaining what the money was for. The Elias Greer Youth Foundation, for the ones who have the gift and just need the chance. And nobody outside a very small circle knew whose name was on the account that funded it. Nobody needed to. Michael Jordan has 6 championship rings. He has trophies and records and a name that will be spoken by people who have not yet been born. He has highlights that will outlast everyone who was alive to watch them happen. But in a brown leather purse in his mother's guest room, there is a folded black and white photograph of a little boy in mismatched shoes sitting on the front steps of a small house in Wallace, North Carolina. And another just like it that spent 60 years hidden under the mattress of a man the world never knew. 2 halves of a prayer spoken by a woman who saw further ahead than anyone had a right to see. Don't let him forget this. He will carry it forward. Michael Jordan carries it now, both halves, and the whole sentence, because that is what champions do. Not the ones the world makes, the ones love makes. They carry what others had to put down. They play for the ones who never got to play. And they hold on, even when nobody is watching, especially then. And that is the story of the photograph in the purse. A little boy named Elias, a 12-year-old girl who never forgave herself, a great-grandmother who split a prayer in 2 and trusted that life would put it back together, and a brown leather purse that carried all of it, quietly, faithfully, for 50 years. Greatness is never only yours. Someone always came before. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching this from right now? Drop your city, your country, or even just a hello in the comments below. You would be surprised how many people from all over the world end up in the same comment section. All of us strangers, all of us connected by a story like this one. If this touched your heart even a little, please give this video a like. It takes 1 second, but it tells us that stories like this one matter, that kindness matters, that the people the world forgot still deserve to be remembered. And if you believe that everyone deserves to hear stories that remind them how connected we all are, subscribe to this channel. Share it with someone who needs it today, because that is how we spread something good in a world that can always use more of it. 1 click, 1 share, 1 person whose day gets a little better because you did. The next video is on your screen right now. We think you are going to love it. We will see you there.